There's a lot of terminology that we need to know. I'd like to cover 3 terms that are required for takeoff and landing weights, and the terms that I'm talking about are they're to do with calculating takeoff distance and takeoff weights and landing conditions. So the first one is called ambient conditions. Ambient conditions. Now, ambient conditions is to do with just the area of the airport. So you're just talking about just the environment that the airport is sitting in this particular aerodrome. And the ambient conditions are the atmospheric pressure, the atmospheric temperature, as well as the wind conditions. We'll just put here the wind conditions. Now this is at a particular airport in the period of the 15 minutes prior to takeoff. 15 minutes prior to takeoff. Now the thing is, the pilot is at the airport, so quite easily the pilot can look around and determine what the wind conditions are. They can see if it's got a wet runway or a dry runway. They can get the measurement of the pressure in the altimeter, and they can take the temperature. So these 3 aspects are useful when the pilot is just calculating the takeoff performance of the aircraft, and that's considering the weight of the aircraft, that it needs to be the limitations based on these conditions. Right, that's ambient conditions. I'd like to now look at forecast conditions. Again, we're going to be talking about the weather conditions at the aerodrome that we're taking off, and we're talking about the forecast conditions, which is the atmospheric pressure, the atmospheric temperature, and these are for, actually, we're more focused here on the forecast conditions of when we arrive at our destination of arrival. So our destination aerodrome, and this is where we take off. We can get so at the arrival, we need to know before we take off what are the forecast conditions for the aerodrome that we're landing at. This must be known before takeoff, and it's important that we get the forecast conditions that is issued not by this must be issued by authorized meteorological officer. Not just anyone can give that. It's the forecast condition for that aerodrome. So it's important to be able to do the calculations of the landing requirements before you actually take off. And final term for this session is what's called declared conditions. Now, in the absence of having a forecast condition, we need to make reference to any published information that has been made available by the authorities of that jurisdiction, and it's what they call the atmospheric pressure and temperature, well, actually, it's or in the absence of pressure and temperature, we could simply get density altitude. And sometimes what you will find is there's a density altitude chart, and they put out a chart different seasons because the density altitude changes based on the temperature for the season. So what they do is they take the average temperature for that season and they come up with a chart where they might publish lines, and the lines, each line represents a particular density altitude for that season. So what you do is you find where your terminal is, where your aircraft is, and you find your density altitude. It might be 1,600 feet at that time of year. And so we're going to use that information to calculate what we need to be able to calculate for takeoff and landings. So when we're doing our takeoff and landings, things we're going to be considering are things like temperature, things like whether the wind speed and the wind direction, what type of surface it is, whether it's a hard surface or a grassy surface, whether it's wet, whether it's dry, because that's going to make it more friction on the wheels when it's trying to sort of land. And all of this comes in handy to work out ultimately your landing performance and your takeoff performance. So the terminologies are ambient conditions, remember 15 minutes prior to takeoff at the destination, at the airport that we're taking off from. Forecast conditions, and that's usually for the destination terminal. So also, if we're going to take off straight away, we're going to then have a look at the ambient conditions and take that into consideration once we arrive. And then declared conditions. In the absence of forecast conditions, we can use published charts that have been put out by the Director General of Australia or the authority of the country. All right, so there's 3 new terms for you: ambient conditions, forecast conditions, and declared conditions. So until I speak to you again, stay happy.